Kriega Bundle up. Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and welcome to the library. I'm Tennessee Fats, and we're coming to you today from here because today we're shooting a topic that's actually 1 year late. Many of you have been asking over the last year, Tennessee Fats, please get back into the Titan Comics, Conan the Barbarian series, and let us know your thoughts. And unfortunately, I had too many other projects on the go. But as of last week, I was able to sit down and read Titan Story Arc number 4. And boy, am I happy I did. These are the stories that went from issue number 13 through 16 that came out in July to October of last year. Today, we're finally getting into doing our deep dive. We're doing our review. But I'm going to warn you guys this right now. The beautiful part about this being a year later, I don't need to do this spoiler free. I got to assume you've probably already read it. If you're watching this video, you just probably want to know my thoughts. So, I'm warning you, if you haven't read it and you don't want to know, just skip right to the last chapter. Don't go through any of the stuff that we're going to be talking through in the medium time, okay? Just stop. I don't want to ruin it for you. But, for those of you who have, let's start getting into our deep dive on this one. We'll start off with, well, what's the overarching story? Like, what happens here? And then we'll go through each issue and what happens in each of those. Then we'll wrap this bad boy up with, well, Tennessee Fats, what did you think? Should I go buy this? Well, if you've probably read it, you probably already own it. But let's just get to my thoughts on that when we get there, shall we? Yes, I think we'll save that till then. Now, this video is already a year late. Let's not waste any more time on the intro. Let's get into the books. Okay. It's time to get into the non-spoiler-free segment of the video. It's also time to put down this incredibly full cup of coffee before something really, really bad happens. Welcome to the desk, everybody, and it's time to get into the story. Now, I'm also going to say right now, you guys are probably going to hear a fair amount of wind noise going on in the background. It was getting way too hot in the office. We have open windows going right now. Here's the deal. I could surmise this story with the following glib sentence. I could say, well, really, story arc number 4 is a 4-issue series that captures and does a retelling of the Gods of the North with a little bit of comic edition at the front and a little bit of comic edition at the back. Full stop. But that would actually be selling the story quite short. This story arc is, in fact, a retelling of Robert E. Howard's Gods of the North, or The Frost Giant's Daughter. And that is entirely encapsulated within issue number 15 of the 4 issues. And there are issues that are in front of this, and 1 issue behind this. But there's more to this than that. And let's talk about what that is. There's an interview with Jim, or at least that Jim is included within, that's in the back of issue number 16. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so, because it really walks through the mindset that Jim had when he was going into this. And the quote, I think it's a beautiful quote. I'm going to just slaughter it here. But I believe it was that he didn't want to just do another straight retelling because those had already been done beautifully. And he wanted to know what he can add. And this is really the point of view you need to take when you walk into this story. This isn't just The Frost Giant's Daughter, or Gods of the North. This is actually a take where you have the known quanta, the known amount, the known entity that is that Howard story. But now you're taking a different twist on it. Jim was going into this with that idea, which is why you ended up with 2 separate and very distinct story arcs and subplots that have been added into and that now capture and are included in Jim's adaptation of the Gods of the North. And these 2 subplots are actually really interesting. One really dives into what you're going to call the inner workings of the mind of Conan the Barbarian. What makes him think what he does. And we're going to get into these a little more when we go through each individual issue. And the other one here was really one where I didn't see it coming, which is what happens if the main, let's just call it the main character that Conan is dealing with in the Gods of the North, has a totally different motivation for doing what they're doing. And again, I'll talk more about that when we go through the issues. These are really interesting subplots that actually change the feel, almost, as I would say. I think that feel would probably be the appropriate word when you're reading the Gods of the North. So that's really what you have here. You have not just here some Gods of the North with no, that's actually selling it short. What you have here is a totally different re-imaging of Gods of the North, while still staying true to Howard's chronological events that happened in that story. And that, I think, is really neat. Now, before we get into the issues, though, I was actually really surprised to see this Howard piece this early in the Titan arc. If you think about it, this is only arc number 4. And when Titan launched and was relaunching the Conan the Barbarian comics, and I'm going to use the word launch and relaunch for a reason here, they seemed to be fairly clear at that point in time that we shouldn't be expecting any Howard adaptations anytime soon. And I don't know if that was me misreading the dialogue and the commentary that was coming back, but I clearly got a sense from Titan that they really weren't that interested. It's already been done, so why would they? And yet here we are seeing this in just the 4th story arc. Now, I believe, and again, I don't work at Titan. I don't know. Nobody's having these conversations with me. I believe this was done and included because it was a wonderful vehicle that allowed you to do a little bit more psychological development for Conan in his young life. That sort of sets the tone for how he looks at things going forward in Titan's comic adaptations or Titan's comic stories. And I think that's probably why they put that in here. It's almost the case where Titan was looking for a point where they said, well, how can we make Conan think X? And then they went, oh, this story could do it. I don't know if that's the case or not. Either way, I was really surprised to see this. I'm not saying it's a negative thing. I think it's a wonderful, pleasant surprise. I'm a Howard fan. I like Howard stuff. So when I see anything that's Howard new, I'm like, ooh, ooh. All right, that's my thought there. Okay, now, we've already walked through what the story is overarching. Let's get through the actual individual issues. Okay, so issue number 13. That's story 1, so we might as well start there, right? Issue 13 is actually a pretty interesting intro issue. Now, this one kind of sets a tone, and this one really surprises you because it sets this foundation that you then have flipped when you go into the next story. We'll get to that in a minute, though. Effectively, what you have here is a young Conan. A young Conan is wandering further north after the sack of Venarium. Now, we all know the sack of Venarium. That was a critical moment for Conan, and we know Titan already covered that particular event. And when they did that, they really did this wonderful play within Conan's mind. And it was a play where you saw Conan really questioning and having a yearning to see what was beyond, because it's almost like he's lost, well, a real sense of grounding in what he had, which is why he was wandering away. But that was sort of inferred. This really draws it out and just hits you over the head with it. And this is where we start to see Jim really building in the first of these 2 subplots that I mentioned earlier. And this subplot is really the one of what's going on in Conan's mind. How does he understand the world around him, specifically with regards to things beyond what he can touch, taste, feel, smell, all the things that you would pick up with your normal senses. And it draws back, and Jim's beautifully drawn it back to his childhood. Conan is wandering away. He's heading north. He's trying to find something new. Now, he's got that Pictish sword, that sword that he picked up after the sack of Venarium with him. And it's not really a big point, but it becomes a big point later. It's just there. And that sword's really important. You see the imagery up over here on the wall. Trust me, I'm buying into what Titan did here. It's a good thing. So as he's heading off, the events are effectively such that he wanders along and he runs into the remains of a hunter that's been taken down by a pack of wolves. He slaughters some of the wolves. He eats. He survives. He goes off. He decides to become a hunter, slaughters a bear. And as he's carrying the bear back to actually clean it and deal with the actual issue of eating it, he finds himself confronted with 3 Aesir. And that's, if you're looking for the story of what actually happened. But it's the psychological piece that goes with this that's really the background. Because this story is written from Conan's point of view, or at least the narrator is narrating from Conan's point of view. And in here you have Conan reflecting back in his youth. It's not just a story of here's chronological events. It's a story of here's chronological events, subplot, and then chronological subplot, and then chronological subplot. It's drawn in there so you understand why his actions are what they are when he's taking them. because he's thinking back. And as he's thinking back, he's remembering his youth. That's really the point here. He's remembering being a child. He's remembering his tribespeople talking about Crom, and really how everything seems to just be washed away or just done away with because, well, Crom. Well, why? Well, because Crom. Well, why is it? Because Crom. And granted, there's fight scenes in here where he's training and he's learning how to fight and he's improving himself to be basically a person of means. But the subplot is Crom. And Doug Braithwaite, who's the artist in this arc, does a fantastic job. And because really, and I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again, he does a wonderful job mirroring and matching the emotion that goes with Conan. The psychological aspect that goes with it, because you can see it in the eyes. And you really can see it in young Conan's eyes when he's being told these things and he's looking on like, really? Are you sure about that? And although it doesn't become such that he's now openly saying, no, I don't believe in Crom. I'm not buying this. You can clearly see it's laying in there. And as he's moving along in his hunting, he's wondering, well, I left after the sack of Venarium because I was looking for something else. Maybe hunting is just all there is. Maybe this is actually my peace. And that's why he decided to stay in the wilds and hunt the bear as he went later on. It really was one where Conan's trying to find his way in the world. Not necessarily because he's not believing in the theological background, although that does become prominent later. But it's very much one where he's, what am I supposed to do here? What's the point? And that really was a wonderful subset that was drawn into the first issue of this story arc. Really an interesting issue, and I had a lot of fun reading this one. Alright, let's get into issue number 2. Alright, now issue 2 of this story arc, which is actually chronological issue number 14, is where you start to see the flip. And this is where you as a reader are left somewhat upended. Now, there's a reason for that. When you read issue 13, that was written from the narrative point of view of Conan, and you got Conan's thoughts, and you got to see what Conan's, subtext was that was going with it. But we jump into the very next issue of the story arc, which is only part 2 of 4, and now things have flipped. This story is actually written from Atali's point of view. Now, Atali being the daughter of Ymir, the god of the north, the frost giant's daughter. And this is a really interesting thing because we now know we're heading into the frost giant's daughter because, well, we saw Atali in the last panel of issue 13 as observing Conan. But now you're seeing her observing and you're getting her thoughts. And it's an interesting one because chronologically what happens in this story, if you're looking at the events, Conan, as I mentioned, when he's coming back at the end of issue 13, he has the bear with him, and he runs into the larger group of Aesir. They approach the camp as well. And Conan's actually given leave to, be escorted out of their territory as long as he gives him the bear. And he'll be safe. And Conan goes beyond this, though, and he starts to prove himself as working with them. There's a sack by the Vanir, and you actually get a little bit of the background that leads into where the hostility comes from at the beginning of the Frost Giant's daughter. And Conan's involved in that. Chronologically, he's going through the events of helping with them recover from this, not with it, but recover from it. And you also have him proving himself to the Aesir and saying, listen, I'm here, I'm going to help you guys. And they really do respect that. And while he's going through this, though, Atali is watching. And Atali's watching, and it's interesting getting this is where you start to see the second subplot that Jim really drew in here, which is, what's going on in the mind of this character? In Robert E. Howard's Gods of the North, if you read her narrative, you would get a sense that she's really working just to, harvest Conan. And I know it's a harsh term, but really that's what it was. That's what she was going with here. Well, now that's changed. You see her observing. You don't really get a sense of why she's harvesting Conan. You do get a sense that she sees humans as being petty and small and frail, and this thing that she's kind of curious, why is my father so obsessed with these guys? And it's an interesting thing that as she's going through her observations, through the events that are occurring, and I'm not going to go through them line by line, that she's beginning to see Conan distinguish himself more and more. There's also dialogue in here which suggests that perhaps she's seeing something beyond the physical representation of the characters. There's one line in here where I believe she sees Conan standing, and she makes a reference to the fact that he's standing taller. And it's questioned, and it's at least suggested, that what she's seeing is his soul or stature is standing taller than the rest. really an interesting way of looking at things, and you start to see the narrative coming from Atali's point of view. And this is where, as I mentioned, you've got the disjointed sense from story 1, where now you're disjointed in story 2, and as a reader, you're kept on your toes. You're thinking, well, whoa, why am I getting her point of view now? What's going to happen next? But it does perfectly set the tone for where we pick up at the beginning of The Frost Giant's Daughter. The battle has actually occurred, which is a little bit of a mystically twisted thing. I'm just going to leave it at that. But the battle has occurred, and at the end of this, very few are left. And Atali is watching this, and that's really, but she is hellishly impressed with Conan, and she knows, I'm going to make that guy mine. Interesting end of the story, but a beautiful setup to the beginning of what we know is going to now be The Frost Giant's Daughter. Okay, so issue 15, which was the third part of the story arc, is the one that we really all saw coming at the end of part 2. And here's why. And here's what happened here. At the end of part 2, that battle had happened. And you knew the Vanir were there. You knew the Aesir were there. You saw Atali making that comment of, I will make him mine. And if you're a Howard fan, you knew it was coming next. And issue 15 is that issue. It is the Gods of the North story. Now, I could go through chronologically what happens in the story and say, here's what happened, but if you're a Howard fan, you already know. If you really want to know, you can go back and watch my Battle Royales where I've walked through, here's what happens at the Gods of the North. Because it's actually a really cool short story. You should probably check it out if you haven't read it, because it's a good one. The twist here, though, and this is where Jim has done his work and saying, no, I wanted to see what I could add to this story. I didn't just want to do a straight retelling, and he really did achieve that, was where we were left disjointed between story number 1 and story number 2 as a reader. Because suddenly the narrative is flipped, and it's going to Atali's point of view now. In here, we're continuing that. And what I liked about this was you didn't jump back to Conan's point of view at this point in time. And I think that was really smart, because what you had here was Conan's point of view and his, let's just call it sub-story, a subplot. Book 2 was starting to introduce Atali and her point of view and her subplot. And this is the one where her subplot really comes to the forefront. And her subplot really was one where, well, what if she was watching Conan for a longer period of time? In Gods of the North, it's kind of inferred, but it's never actually stated, that she just sort of magically pops up while that battle is occurring, that Conan is within between the Vanir and the Aesir. And, okay, you could take that as just being what happened, or you could take this particular take, which is what happens if she was actually watching him for a while. The other story that comes out of this is, well, what if she actually wasn't saying, I'm going to make that guy my dad's breakfast? She was saying, I'm going to make that guy mine. Now, at the end of story 2, that's exactly what she said. And it's funny, because if you took that literally, I didn't. And I was like, oh, that's what we're doing here. This is where you suddenly have her subplot come to the forefront and then come right back out. Chronologically, it does match the Gods of the North story. There is very small dalliances here where it differs. And I'll talk to that in a second. But it's not worth diving into. The story happens, but it's wonderfully written completely from Atali's point of view, with that subplot, and with her narrative. Bear in mind, in issue 2, story issue 2 of the 4th arc, which is issue number 14. And it's a really confusing way to explain it. In issue number 14, that's probably the better way to go, you really had her wondering about men. Why is my father fixated with these guys? Why are they? They're petty. They're small. I don't understand. And here you started to see her making commentary with regards to the fact that her father is getting old, and that she wants to make Conan hers, not her father's. Hers. Now she's leading him off into some sort of trap. We don't know what her intention was once she makes Conan hers. And that's really an interesting question that perhaps can be delved into at a later time. But as she's going along, she's suddenly recognizing, dad's found out, he's not happy. Suddenly brothers pop up. They pop up basically because of the father being aware of what's happening. And that was kind of interesting. And then it was, why is my father stealing my prize? I got this guy. He's mine. That came out. And then when Conan is successful against the brothers, which happens in the Gods of the North, it's, how did that happen? And then there starts to be the moment of recognition. And this was character growth for Atali as well. The recognition that perhaps she's been underestimating the power of men a little bit. Perhaps she's wrong in questioning her father and why her father views men this way. And that was really neat. and really well done. Because you started to see this character become more. And it was interesting that it was only once the brothers were dead, and it was just her and Conan. And it was this wonderful inner monologue of, well, I don't want to relent and ask for my father's help. He's literally leaving me here to be punished for a reason. I don't want to, and then, oh crap, I have to. And then she calls out to her father, and there's the cataclysmic, phantasmagorical ending, which occurs, which I thought was pretty well done. And Conan then wakes up with that, the piece of gossamer in his hand, and what's the guy's name? Gorn? Is that his name? The guy with the scar is like, no, I saw her before, it's totally cool, what he's saying is true, yeah, and everyone's like, yeah, crazy. That all happens. Really an interesting telling, and that's what happens in this particular issue. Now, before I get into issue 16 though, I'm going to point out a little subtle thing that was done in this story. Remember when I talked about issue number 13, how Conan's wandering off into the north and he has that Pictish blade. Now we know how important that Pictish blade is. During the battle with the Frost Giant's sons, Atali's brothers, Conan's primary weapon, his sword, is smashed. The weapon that he's actually successful in killing the brothers with has been wonderfully drawn in here to be the Pictish weapon. Now there's no reference to that in Howard's story, but that clearly was done intentionally. Just a little bit more weight to, the power of that particular weapon, which then comes into later stories. Story arc number 3 in particular, which was particularly important. Just a small observation there I made. Okay, now issue 16. This is where we start to come back to settling off that first story arc, which was what I'll call the theological exploration of Conan's thought process. But issue 16 does something else as well. And what's interesting in here is it is split. The story is split again to the chronological events. Here's what physically happens. And then here's the metaphysical events. Here's what's going on in his mind, and here's what he's thinking about. This one, Conan's back at the fire with the Acer, having a good time, eating, drinking, looking at this thing, thinking to himself, not quite sure what to make of this. Crazy old guy comes over, they have a conversation about it. Conan's still not really sure what to make of this. Wanders off, and one of the Aesir, in fact, one of the first 3 Aesir that Conan ran into all the way back in issue number 13, that really has proven himself to be a bit of a dip, decides to pick a fight with Conan. And for some reason, this just escalates. It escalates and escalates and escalates to the point where Conan's like, okay, I gotta kill you. And he kills him. The other Aesir come over, discover it, and go, what have you done? And you can't come back to the fire. Effectively, Conan's being banished. And Conan's like, okay, whatever. Yeah, I know I can't come back. I'm leaving. Whatever. I'm done with you guys. You're dibs. And he leaves. But the subplot is the larger story. The subplot is the one where Conan is now going back. And this subplot is one where you're now drawing in, and Jim is writing in, a real character development, a building of a relationship between Conan and his father. And that's interesting. We've seen comic companies build up the relationship between Conan and his grandfather, Conan and other members of his tribespeople, but you always kind of, when you saw the vignettes of relationship between Conan and his father, there was never really a sense of what it was, or really how deep it was. And here you really see the depth of that relationship. Conan admits to his father, listen, I don't believe in crime. And his father reacts, pretty much how you'd expect somebody to react that hears that, who's believed in it their entire life, and bibbity bangity boom, the things are going down, kid. No, the things are going down, kid thing didn't happen. What did happen was the father actually relented, and it's like, okay, let's have a conversation. And this is a beautiful piece of character building for Conan's father, which is written into the story, which was Conan's father admits that with the death of Conan's mother, and when he was left with just young Conan, he didn't believe in Crom. He questioned everything. And he felt like he was lost in the world. He just couldn't believe in anything. And when he comes back to explain, but at the end of the day, I thought my way through this, and I realized because Crom is everything and everywhere, he is the foundation that carries me. I use that as my strength because of this. And at that point in time, young Conan hearing this is still... And he's thinking, that might be good for you, but I'm going to come back to this, taste, touch, feel, all that I see, all that good stuff that I can see with my senses that verifies this for me. Because Conan's seen as a very tactile individual versus his father, who does apparently have the ability to be more metaphysical. Now, what's interesting, though, is as he's going through this reflection, there's then the point of consideration. Wait a minute. I did just taste, touch, feel, see, look at Gossamer thing, and the sudden realization of, well, hold on. If Atali's real, that means her dad's real. If they're real, why wouldn't Crom be real? And suddenly, oh. And it really does set this wonderful moment of, it's almost like you had to see, or in Conan's case, he needed to see the proof of something else to verify the faith in his own religion. It was a really interesting play in how that was done, and reconciling the fact that Conan is so tactile. He believes what he can see and touch and feel and taste, and how that was translated into a belief that he, as a character, then carries throughout his whole life, where he's cursing and swearing to Crom and praying, not really praying to Crom, but at one point in time, actually, yeah, he does make a sacrifice to Crom in the Marvel series, which was really good. I'd encourage you to read that story. If you're curious as to which one that is, just down below. It's a good one. Moot point. But you saw that growth, and you saw it in there. And then Conan goes off into the world at the end of issue 16, recognizing, I do live in a world where gods exist, ghosts exist, ghouls exist, all these things exist. So suddenly the physical world, which is so threatening and horrifying to begin with, now becomes something that much more. Now it's interesting, issue 13, and this was never reconciled in the story. At a moment there, he was ready to live the rest of his life just being a hunter and surviving. I'll eat, I'll survive. I'll eat, I'll survive. At the end of issue 16, with the realization that the world is something much larger, he's now comfortable wandering off into the wilderness. And I wonder what the rationale is in Conan's head that makes him think that. I'm glad he does. Obviously, it sets the tone for everything else he does for the rest of his Howard career. But why? Why would he have done this? It's a neat one. That is how they leave it off, though, and that's the end of issue number 16. So we're done sitting over at the desk going through the various chapters. And now we're back at the library, because we have to answer the very difficult question. Tennessee Fats, what did you think of this? What are your final thoughts? Okay, I'm going to steal my own thunder here a little, and I'm going to throw this out right now. I really enjoyed this. Story arc number 4 I thought was a lot of fun, and really, it did add value. I'm going to call it that. It really did add value. Let's start breaking this down into details, but then I really want to talk about something that's just left a hair on my tongue. It's giving me this deja vu feeling that for some reason I'm sure is just me. But hear me out and let me know in the comments if you found this as well, because I'm not saying it's negative, and I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying for me it's like, really, what is that? Okay, let's start walking through this in detail. Doug Braithwaite, this was a very good choice for the art. And I have to call it like that because it is. I really enjoyed Doug Braithwaite's work. And I commented on that in the last Titan arc video I did where we reviewed that. And I'll put a link to that down in the description below if you're interested in checking that one out as well. One of the comments I made then, and I'm going to make it now again, is that his art is beautiful for the more thoughtful aspects of Conan the Barbarian. It really does draw into that more intellectual and emotive side of Conan as opposed to the bashing and fighting side. All the bashing and fighting side is very good. The art is married very well to that. So choosing him as the artist in this story, when you really were doing a psychological exploration of the character, was beautifully done. That was a wise choice, and it really does marry the art and the words quite well. So 2 points on that. The other thing that happened in here, well, it's Gods of the North. Like, I really like Gods of the North as a story. If you're adding anything to that, unless you do something horribly, horribly wrong, I'm going to like this. And you didn't do anything horribly, horribly wrong here. So to me, 2 thumbs up on that. When you're drawing in that piece of Howard lore for that wonderful short story, and then you're trying to build your own narrative around it, I'm going to give you points on that. That to me works really well. We knew when we walked into this one, and in fact I commented on that in that first segment we were sitting at the desk, where I quoted Jim from the interview that was in issue number 16, I think. Clearly when he walked into this, he knew he was adding more to this. He didn't want to just retell Gods of the North. In fact, he noted that it's already been done beautifully, so why would he? But then he added these 2 beautiful subplots to this that were covered throughout the issues, and we walked through those. And we walked through each issue. Those are really well done, and they were a nice piece of exploration of not only Conan, but the character of Atali at the same time. And that I really, really enjoyed. But here's where I get this weird sense of deja vu. And I know this is mostly me. I know it's mostly me and not necessarily a Titan issue, because I just finished doing all of these battle royales where I had to read every Conan story written by Howard, and I read every comic adaptation. And there's going to be lots of links. You can find them on the channel. Go get them. I won't bother putting them down in the description because there's so many of them. But they're done. I finished reading Hour of the Dragon, and that was a big one. And you got to understand, when you go through Hour of the Dragon, that is an epic long story. And I'm referencing it here because there's something here that's very deja vu-like for me as a reader. And what's deja vu-like for me as a reader here is really where you saw the twist of the narrative in Gods of the North in issue number 15, where Atali's point of view was brought forward, as well as the subplot that Jim added. And to me, that mirrors exactly back to what Dark Horse did in Hour of the Dragon, where they put out that issue where it talked about Akavasha and did the whole story from her point of view. Now, that wasn't issued as part of the 12 comic issues that Dark Horse put out to cover Hour of the Dragon. It was part of another series. And some of you who have been watching this video on this channel for a long time will remember that I went out and bought the entire run of that particular Dark Horse series just so I can get that one book. Because it was actually cheaper for me to buy the run than it was for me to buy the one book. The book actually looks like this, if you're curious. And it's a great story. And in that, you saw Dark Horse flip the narrative for Akavasha around, where it really talks to her point of view for that small piece of Hour of the Dragon that she had. But it builds on her character in the front and in the back, which is very similar to what we just saw here with Atali, where it builds on the character in the front. Not really in the back, because it really wraps up for her at the end of issue number 15, but it's a very similar event, and it's a beautifully done piece. I'm not saying this is something that's negative. I'm saying this was a really well done adaptation, and I really enjoyed it. But it is very similar to what I just saw in that Dark Horse piece. And to me, it just makes me going, this is so deja vu-like. Now, I know there's a huge difference in time between these two. Different companies, different everything about it. But clearly, if it worked once, obviously you know it's going to work again, because literally it was beautifully done then. And it's just been beautifully done now. I'm not saying people should not do this again. I think people should continue to do this. I think this is a wonderful thing for Howard aficionados really to dive into, where they can see different writers doing their take, where they do deep dives on some of the characters that are those onion layers that are in Howard's original stories. I would like to see more of this going forward. I really enjoyed this. To me, though, this one just made me go back, ooh. And of course, as soon as I finished this, I then went down the rabbit hole of rereading Hour of the Dragon and that Akavasha issue again. And I know I don't have a lot of time, but it was still worth it. I'm glad I did that. Yeah, so there you go. I really enjoyed this series. A lot of fun. Okay, let's wrap this video up, shall we? Now, before I do that, I'm going to put the coffee down. There. I'm a spilly talker, and we don't want coffee all over everything. In fact, nobody wants coffee all over their office. That's just a bad idea. Okay, now hear me out on this. I actually have two thoughts on this. Should you go buy this? Well, if you're a Robert E. Howard aficionado, somebody who really wants to own all the Robert E. Howard written stories and their comic adaptations, you definitely want to own issue number 15. That issue in and of itself is the Gods of the North story. Now, it's flipped. It's written from Atali's point of view, and I do think that's a rather interesting take on the story. But the events of the story occur pretty much how Howard wrote them. Some minor deviations. They're not even worth mentioning, but it's pretty much following. But what you are going to miss out on in that story is some of the inference that Howard put in his story as to what's going on in Conan's mind throughout the events. I don't think at any point in time, if I remember correctly, Howard actually said Conan thought this, and a lot of it's open to interpretation. But some of that might get lost in issue number 15, because it is a comic. That's just pictures, so bear that in mind. But if you are interested in a real deep dive exploration of Conan the character and how he fits in his world, the other three issues are beautiful. You can read issue 15 in isolation. You can take that issue, without having the 2 in front of it and the 1 after it, and read it and be perfectly fine. You can also, hear me out on this, read issue 13, 14, and 16 in isolation, just knowing that Gods of the North fit in the middle there, if you know what the Gods of the North story is. And that is a beautiful exploration of Conan questioning his own theology. And at the end of the day, recognizing, well, things do go bump in the night here, and finding his place in the world, and continuing to adventure thereafter. That's a really neat piece. The 2 marry quite well. If you take the actual Gods of the North and Conan theological piece, it's a wonderful story arc. You would really enjoy it. But if you're not interested in either aspect, you could pick one or the other. I personally would just pick all 4. That's just my take on it, because it does read like a fun story, and well, I'm a Cananophile. I read Conan, so I'm somewhat biased on this. But I've given you the arguments as to what you could enjoy if you were to take a different take on this one. Yeah. Well, there you go. Everybody, that's our video for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd go further into this one, but I want to dive back a little bit here because, well, I still need to get caught up on my Titan issues, so I'd rather go down that rabbit hole. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you in the next one.